thank you so much for doing this interview with me. More importantly, this four-part series that we're going to talk about, I think is probably one of the most important events that's going to be happening on television in 2024. I'm going to go right into this first. Please explain to the folks on what this four-part series is about, because this is about Canadian history, and it's a dark side of Canadian history.
This is about the truth, really. It's about Canada's truth, and it's told through my own family's over 80-year search for Annie Carpenter. Annie, my mom has been searching for her for so long. She's my mom's great-grandma, and my mom turned to me and said, Tanya, I've always wanted to find what happened to her. The women in my family, my mother's side of the family, have always been so silent. We didn't know so much about them, who they were really, what language they spoke, where they were from. Why is that? Because of Indian residential schools, because of Indian hospitals, because of Canada's, as you said, dark history, things like the Indian Act and the fact that it was the law to send your children to Indian residential school in this country for decades. So this story, the series, is about my family's search for answers and search for Annie, who she was, where she lived, where she breathed, where she loved, her children, her brothers and sisters, their children, what happened to all of them. And how is it, through the course of the four-part series, you'll find me finding Annie, and she's buried in an unmarked grave here in Toronto off of the Queen Elizabeth Way near a giant IKEA in Sherway Gardens. She was here all this time, but thousands of kilometers away from where she was from.
The tragic part to all this is, this is one story. But this is one story representing countless stories.
Exactly, and I started to look for Annie and Ernest right before the Lestway, the missing, the children from Kamloops Indian Residential School. And it was, I really do believe, the spirits of those children that woke up the rest of Canada and got us looking again, focusing again on the children that did not come home from Indian Residential School. Those who didn't come home from Indian hospitals, from tuberculosis sanitarium, those who didn't come home from asylums. It got us looking everywhere for all of those people in our families and our communities that we knew have been missing for so long. And the knowing is all of those stories. And I really hope, as what you just asked, I hope that other First Nation, Métis, and Inuit families see themselves in their stories, in my family's story, and realize that they can do the same thing. Start looking for the ones that were lost, that died. You'll find so much about your own personal history. You'll find so much about your family, and you'll see that as Indigenous peoples, we are people of the land, of the water, of the rivers, of the lakes. We are not these Indian Act communities, these First Nations communities that are reserves and just confined in little places. We are so much more than that, and we're so much more unified and related than you would think. And I would hope that through this series, Canada sees the beauty of our families too. The tragedy, yes, but the beauty and the love for us to remember all of those that we've lost and say their names. And that's how we honor them. And I think Canada as a country needs to hear those stories, and then we'll change how we are seen and how this country can even possibly move forward together. The word reconciliation is used a lot. We can't get there until we get to the truth, and this is part of it.
I need to ask this question. If the discovery of those children did not happen, would the series be on the air?
Yes, I think so, because I had this brown filing folder from my Uncle Hank Bowen. He, for so long, remember I mentioned it was an 80-year search, he had all these pieces of paper, these letters that he'd written to government officials asking for where his mom and his grandma were. And it's those letters that he left me that led to the knowing. But in the same way, the knowing is also about Kamloops. It's also about survivors, intergenerational survivors, the people I've met along the way of this journey. So it wouldn't be at all the series it was if it wasn't for the missing.
As we look to the future, what do you hope to see as we, how do I put this, as we open our eyes to what happened in the past?
It's still ongoing. Genocide against our people is still ongoing. Our people fill the prisons. In my home community is Fort William First Nation, Thunder Bay, and the Thunder Bay jail is full of First Nations people. It's the same in Kenora. It's the same across the prairies. You know, it is also, you see our people are struggling to get a high school education. We're still sending our children hundreds of kilometers away from our communities in Northern Ontario, for example, into Thunder Bay or Sioux Lookout or Timmins in order to get a high school education, which is a fundamental right of every other child in this country. The Indian Act is still in play. I am a status Indian. You know, the legislation is still here. So it's still our story, and it's not history.
I love that you said that because it's our story. It's Canada's story. And it's a story that you're telling us. And thank you so much for telling this story that is part of our history.
Miigwech, thank you for covering it.